Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are building the ultimate support character, capable of keeping our party members alive no matter the circumstances. With the upcoming release of Patch 8, it's probable that a lot of people are going to be playing with friends, and sometimes your friends don't make the tactical decisions that you would want them to make. So it can be really helpful to have a character that can keep them alive no matter what they do. It also, of course, can be used with a party that you yourself are controlling just as the most powerful option for supporting your more aggressive teammates. This character goes very, very well with a barbarian or battlemaster fighter, any character that wants to play in the mix with all of the enemies and come out the other side still standing. In fact, you can even play this character as a pure pacifist, taking no aggressive actions throughout the entire game and still contributing immensely to your party. So if you want to roleplay that, then this character is absolutely capable of doing that and still being a tremendous contributor in an honor mode run. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Brandon Kruger for the $50 donation, Fairwison for the €20, and Moonin for the £25, as well as Robert Mayberry and Not Evans for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate your incredibly generous support. It really means a lot. And now we're going to follow your example and support our allies in turn. So let's get to the build. I'm using Shadowheart as the example character here, because this is partly a Cleric build, and she is of course the Cleric of the party, and I also think that this build makes an incredibly flavorful choice for Shadowheart on a sort of reformed Shadowheart or good aligned Shadowheart run. So if you want to play that storyline, I think that this makes a great build for that flavor, based on the events that happen as you play through, either as Origin Shadowheart or just with her in your party, on a more good aligned path. If you're building this as a custom character, then my pick for race is going to be Githyanki. Githyanki gives you access to the Astral Knowledge feature, which makes you even better at being a party face, because it's going to give you all of the intelligence skills proficient, and this character makes an excellent party face already, so you get way more skill access, which just makes you even better at handling all the utility that your party needs, as well as the once per day Misty Step being very, very useful to solve some of this character's positioning issues without having to give them a Misty Step item, so that can be dedicated to a party member to help keep them even safer. Of course, the normal standouts are all very powerful here as well. Halfling's ability to reroll ones makes you much better at succeeding at skill checks, which we're already very good at, so it just makes that even more certain. And of course, makes you less likely to fail saving throws, lose concentration on important spells, and similar things. Wood Elf's bonus movement speed, very useful for positioning. Staying invisible as a Dwergar can be incredibly powerful for this character that can support its allies from the shadows without even needing to get involved in combat a lot of the time. So any of those will make excellent choices. Of course, this character also gets all of its weapon and armor proficiencies inherently, so what race you pick can also be open to flavor. You don't need to pick one for specific mechanics, and can do kind of whatever you want. But those are the most mechanically powerful options. We're going to start with a level in Bard. Taking Bard first gets us better skill access in the early game, and this character is going to be taking both Bard and Cleric levels, so this way we can bring the most utility to our party early on, and it also gets our offensive capabilities online sooner. If you are building offense on this character at all, like I mentioned, you can play this character as a pure pacifist and take no offensive abilities at all. But if you are building offensive capabilities, they're going to come from Bard rather than Cleric, since we want high charisma to be a party face anyways, so getting those earlier helps our character contribute to damage and lockdown more in the very early game. At time of recording, there's also a bug currently where if you multiclass into Cleric later, you get 2 extra skills that you're not supposed to get. I'm guessing this will be fixed with patch 8, but right now you get 2 extra whole skills by taking Cleric later. Even without that bug, though, we still prefer to start with Bard. For our cantrip selection, as a Bard here, we're going to be taking Friends, because of course we're going to be the party face, and Friends is very, very helpful for that, and Minor Illusion. Minor Illusion is critical for pretty much every party in Baldur's Gate. You can use it to group enemies for your AoE spells, you can use it to split apart enemies, or lure them away one at a time to take them out silently without alerting their buddies. An incredibly powerful and versatile effect that every party should have access to. For our spell selection here, we'll be taking Healing Word and Dissonant Whispers. Healing Word, although we are going to be multiclassing into Cleric, and we'll get access to Healing Word from Cleric as well, we always want this spell prepared. We're going to have slightly higher Charisma than Wisdom, so it'll be more healing if you cast the Bard version than the Cleric version. So it's better to just grab this from Bard. We also have other Cleric spells that we want to have prepared, so having this always prepared from Bard is much more useful than having to take it from Cleric. This way we can get our more important Cleric spell preparations, and also always have access to this incredibly important healing effect that can help bring up a downed ally, apply the buff on healing items as a bonus action, and just give you a ton of utility for your party. We're also taking Dissonant Whispers as the best early game combat ability. For a Bard, this can fully lock down a melee enemy for 2 full turns. If they can't move, then they can't do anything if they're melee. Longstrider, if your party doesn't have access to it elsewhere, is very, very important to have, so you should just grab it with your Bard if you don't have Longstrider on another character like a Druid or a Wizard or something. Then just make sure that your Bard picks it up. And then for our last spell, we're going to just take Tasha's Hideous Laughter for more lockdown. Now, if you do want to play this character as a pure pacifist, you can also just cut these 2 offensive spells. You can cut Tasha's and Dissonant Whispers, and instead take utility spells. Things like Heroism can be very useful for healing your allies. Heroism's really not a bad buff. This is often overshadowed by other spells, but 5 healing every turn and immunity to frightened is really not bad for a character that's taking consistent damage, especially a character that multiplies hit points. So if you have a barbarian ally, for example, this can be very useful to cast on them from safety. And then just a utility spell like Disguise Self or Speak with Animals, all of which are very useful to have. Of course, Speak with Animals can be replaced with potions, so I'd use Disguise Self, or I'd take Disguise Self as a spell known over it, but whatever you want here for flavor. For our ability score selection here, we're going to be taking a relatively standard attribute spread for a Bard. We're going to take 16 Dexterity to make sure that we have high armor class and initiative, especially in the early game, 14 Constitution, 16 in Charisma to boost our offensive capabilities and dialogue checks, and 12 Wisdom. We don't need higher Wisdom despite taking levels in Cleric, because we're going to be using primarily buffing and healing spells from Cleric and support spells, so we don't need the high Wisdom to increase our save DCs, because the Cleric spells that we're taking don't use save DCs anyways. For our skill selection, this character is of course going to be our party face, so we want the dialogue skills that we want to be able to use. Make certain you have Persuasion, it's the most important, it governs prices at merchants, and also is the one that comes up by far the most frequently throughout the game and has the most critical roles associated with it. And then whichever other ones that you want for flavor. I also highly recommend that this character takes Sleight of Hand, unless you have specifically a rogue in addition to it in your party, because this character can also just be your lockpicking character, and then you handle all the utility that your party needs. If you are a Githyanki, as I recommended in the race selection section, then you can use that to set your racial astral proficiency bonus to intelligence, and then you have all of the knowledge skills as well, which come up very frequently in dialogue. That's pretty useful for a party face. A lot of the save DCs or the difficulty checks on those skills are not very high, so even with low intelligence, just having proficiency is enough to get you successes on a lot of the important skills there. Other than that, we just need to make certain that we pick the right starting instrument, because if you get the wrong one, your run is entirely ruined, as always for bards. And, that's it. Let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we are immediately multi-classing and taking a level of Cleric. This gets us medium armor and shield proficiency, which makes our character vastly more resilient. And of course, we can't keep our allies alive if we can't keep ourselves alive, so making sure that our character is able to survive what the enemies throw at it is very important. So taking a level of Cleric just makes us a lot tougher. Cleric also gives us a ton of amazing utility for our party. We get 2 of the best utility cantrips in the game in the form of Resistance and Guidance. Guidance may be the single best spell in the game, and of course is also amazing for a character that's making a lot of skill checks, because you can use Guidance to boost those skill checks even further. Every party should strive to have access to 2 copies of Guidance, so that even if you're the character making the check has another reaction they want to use, you can still use guidance. So this character can be one of them. You can use the item that gives guidance for the second one, or if you have another character with access to it, like a druid, then you can have your 2 copies of guidance that way. Resistance is very useful if you know you have an important saving throw coming up. There's some story events that have saving throws, so boosting your ally who's going to do that, or yourself, with resistance can help keep them alive and make sure that you succeed on the saving throws that you get during story events and dialogue very, very effectively. Finally, we're going to take Thaumaturgy, which doesn't have the downsides of Friends and makes us way better at these dialogue checks. We're a party face, so using Thaumaturgy just gives us advantage on a bunch of checks that we're going to be making for free. For our Cleric subclass, although this is a healing and support character, so you might expect that we're going to take Life Domain, we're actually not. We're going to take Light Domain. Not only does this help keep us alive with Warding Flare to defend ourselves, and give us the Light Cantrip, which is a really nice one to have for your party, the purpose of this character is going to be to prevent our allies from taking damage. We're going to use 2 of the best defensive reactions in the game to do that, in the form of improved Warding Flare from level 6 Light Cleric, and Cutting Words from Lorebard. We will be able to use both of these in the same turn, thanks to an item, and so this character can prevent enemies from hitting your allies, and if they do, you'll have tons of healing to back them up. Healing in Baldur's Gate is also less about actually restoring your hit points, which it's often better to do just with potions rather than healing spells, and more about applying the buff on healing item effects. So we don't need the bonus healing from Life Domain to still be an incredibly powerful healer. Instead, we can get the powerful defensive capabilities of Light Domain to keep ourselves and our allies alive even more effectively. As you see here, we also get the 2 bugged skills, so you can select History and Medicine, for example, or Religion and Insight are also possible, but if you're playing Shadowheart, she has those already. This will probably be patched out, but for now, enjoy the free skill proficiencies that you get from multiclassing into Cleric. And then finally, we get 2 extremely powerful utility spells. The first and most important of these is Sanctuary. Sanctuary is an incredibly powerful support spell. If an ally is in any form of danger, you can use your bonus action to put Sanctuary on them, and then most things that enemies want to do to them, they can't. This can keep allies alive in even the most dangerous situations. This can also be used on this character. A lot of what we do doesn't involve targeting or harming an enemy directly, and so will not break Sanctuary. Concentrating on Bless, concentrating on Beacon of Hope, later on, using Warden of Vitality to heal our allies. All of those are things that we can do safely from inside Sanctuary, and operate with complete impunity, preventing our enemies from doing anything to us while we keep our allies alive. One thing to be aware of with Sanctuary with this character, though, is that effects like Cutting Words, which we're going to be using to remove the enemy's ability to hit our allies, do break Sanctuary. So Cutting Words, because it counts as targeting an enemy, does break Sanctuary. So you do have to be a little bit careful with when you activate Cutting Words, and only use it if it's actually going to be helpful if you are sitting around in Sanctuary, because otherwise you're throwing away your Sanctuary for preventing one attack. Maybe the Sanctuary would have prevented more attacks, but this still gives you an incredible safety valve for fights that are going bad, and an incredible bubble of safety to play from where you can be buffing your allies, healing your allies, and helping them out without ever being at threat yourself, making this character vastly harder to actually hurt. The second, of course, is Bless, which is a great spell to concentrate on, the best support spell in the game, pretty much, increasing everything that your allies want to do. It also makes them much safer because it gives them a bonus to their saving throws, so they will no longer be affected by negative spells, even before we can start counterspelling the most dangerous spells, which we will soon be able to do. At character level 3, we're going to take our second level in Bard. Taking more Bard levels gets us access to our amazing defensive reactions sooner, so we want to do that. After our 1 Cleric level, we have a lot of what we need from Cleric in the form of Bless, Sanctuary, and the cantrips. So leveling up as well as Warding Flare. So leveling up in Bard gets us more critical features sooner, which is why we're going to do it before we level in Cleric. Jack of all trades makes us even better at party utility. We're just even better at passing skill checks now. And Song of Rest is one of the best abilities in the game, giving your allies who are reliant on short rest resources way more of them in an adventuring day, as well as more out-of-combat healing. It's a very powerful ability overall. For our spell selection at this level, I guess I took the pacifist version of the spells at level 1, so you would have Dissonant Whispers here. You can pick up, for example, Thunderwave to protect yourself if you're going for an aggressive build. Or, for the pacifist build, you can just grab another utility spell at this point, like Speak with Animals, or Featherfall, in order to stay with the no aggressive actions theme. My suggestion would be that you pick up Thunderwave in order to protect yourself or push enemies off of cliffs if they get too close to you. That's it for level 3. Let's move on to level 4. At level 4, we're taking our 3rd level of Bard, and we already know what Bard subclass we're going to take, because I've already spoiled it. We're taking College of Lore. Cutting Words is an incredible defensive reaction. Of course, it's not explained here what it actually does, but whenever an enemy attacks or makes a saving throw, you can, as a reaction, spend an inspiration die to reduce it by the roll on that inspiration die. That means that enemies are much, much less likely to hit attacks, and you or your allies can be much, much more likely to succeed on lockdown effects and offensive abilities. This is an incredibly powerful ability that this character will get a lot of and be able to just spam, which is extremely helpful, and also is one of the best things out there for keeping your party members alive when they are about to be hit by a critically dangerous attack. Not a critical hit specifically, but a dangerous attack. For our spell selection at this level, for the damage or combat-oriented version of the character, I recommend Cloud of Daggers. Cloud of Daggers is going to be your best combat spell at this point in the game. You can concentrate on it for an amazing amount of damage. Not only is it great AoE damage, it's actually the best single target damage spell available at level 2, at spell level 2 in the whole game, because it does its damage both when you cast it and when enemies start their turn in it. So they're going to basically take double damage the first turn before they can act, and will take 20 average damage and probably die to Cloud of Daggers. So that's why you see it performing so extremely well. For the non-combatant version of the character, you can take something like Enhanceability for more party utility, or Invisibility. Invisibility is a spell that we should definitely have access to for this character, because you can use it to get allies out of bad situations, or yourself. One thing that it is very useful to have in an honor mode run is a way to get out of a losing combat safely. Invisibility is a great way to do that and can keep you alive even if things start to go wrong. So we'll take Cloud of Daggers, and I'm going to go ahead and replace a spell here. We would replace something like Thunderwave in the more combatant-focused version, and pick up Invisibility, because the utility of having that is very, very useful. We also get more, we get skill expertise and more skills because we're a lore bard, so this makes us even better at passing skill checks, and we get expertise in 2 things. I recommend putting your expertise in Persuasion and Sleight of Hand. That makes this character incredible at picking locks and passing dialogue checks, so you cover all the utility that your party could ever want. And then for your extra skills, you can kind of take whatever here. If you're a Githyanki, you already have all the intelligent skills, so you can put those in, for example, Perception. Always useful to have Perception. Acrobatics to prevent yourself from being pushed, which is one of the ways that this character can get into trouble. And then you can pick up the other dialogue skills, for example. Really here, whatever you want, as long as you have Persuasion and Sleight of Hand. At level 5, we're taking our 4th level of Bard, and we get our first feat. Now, this character is actually kind of unique in that we don't really need to improve our stats at all. Very few of our abilities actually require us to have high charisma. We don't use that many spells with saving throws or offensive effects, so we can skip out on ability score improvements. Now, if you're playing the offensive version of the build, I would still probably recommend just boosting your charisma, and of course it's never bad for more dialogue checks. But if you're playing the pacifist version of the character, then you can pick up Alert in order to lay down buffs before enemies go, or a more defensively focused feat, something like Lucky, could be really nice for this character as well. Best overall is probably Alert. You can never go wrong taking this on Honor mode, and you'll be able to buff allies before they take damage, which will have the incoming damage because of the items that we're going to be using. So I would recommend grabbing this. But it's worth noting that this character has a lot more freedom to take different feats and experiment with different feats than most characters, which are locked into taking like Alert and ASIs only. This character can do a lot of other stuff because you just don't need the same emphasis on high save DCs that other characters do. So, and a lot of your stuff is reactions, which don't require you to have super high initiative. So while Alert is still incredible and probably the pick no matter what, you don't need it as badly as other characters because you can still react. Just worth keeping that in mind. For our cantrip selection, Cleric doesn't get access to True Strike, so this is our last chance to take it to annoy people in the comments. And for our spell selection here, you can grab a utility spell like Enhance Ability to make yourself better at passing skill checks, or you can take Hold Person in order to lock down more enemies and help your allies get automatic critical hits against them for even more violence. For the best combat effectiveness, I would take Hold Person, but if you're going for the pacifist build, then you can grab Enhance Ability. At level 6, we're taking our 5th level of Bard, which gets us a few things that are amazing for this character. We get improved Bardic Inspiration, making our cutting words, as well as our actual inspirations, much better. D8 is 4.5 bonus on average, compared to a D6's 3.5 bonus, which, when you are talking about reducing an enemy attack roll by that amount, or a saving throw by that amount, is an enormous difference. That makes enemies vastly more likely to fail their attacks or saving throws, because a lot of times these effects are carefully balanced to be within a few points, to have the averages be within 1 or 2 points of the likely save DCs or likely armor classes. So even small increases to the amount that we are decreasing it, which is a sort of awkward phrase, but gets the idea across, are very, very impactful in terms of how many enemy attacks are actually going to land. So improved Bardic Inspiration is enormous. Of course, we also get Font of Inspiration, so they come back on a short rest, and now we can use cutting words many, many more times per adventuring day. For our spell selection at this level, we get access to 2 of the best combat spells in the game, in the form of Hypnotic Pattern and Glyph of Warding. Now, both of these do require save DCs from enemies, but 16 Charisma is enough that they'll fail them pretty frequently. We can also use save DC boosting gear at this point if we're going for a more offensive-focused build. The pacifist version of the build can take something like Plant Growth in order to not take an offensive effect, but still hinder enemies by growing plants on the ground. This can completely shut out melee enemies by quartering their movement speed and preventing them from going anywhere. Melee enemies trapped in a plant growth, which doesn't take concentration, will be completely helpless. So for the combat-focused and slightly more powerful version of the build, I would take Hypnotic Pattern, and then I would replace one of our lower-level spells that we're no longer using as frequently. We probably have other sources of Disguise Self at this point, for example, with Glyph of Warding, to make sure that we have the most powerful combat spells available. But for the pacifist version, you can grab Plant Growth and still be very effective in combat. And finally, at level 7, we get Bard level 6 and get access to Magical Secrets. Magical Secrets is one of the reasons to be a lore bard. Getting these at level 6 as opposed to level 10 makes you so much faster at getting these incredibly powerful spells that can really help your party out. It's also worth noting, for the purpose of these spells, that although we are only a level 6 bard, we actually have 4th level spells because we're a level 7 spellcaster. The level of Cleric still gives us extra spell slots. So the magical secret spells and everything can be upcast in order to improve their effectiveness. The spells that we're going to take here are Counterspell, of course. The theme of this character is defensive reactions, and being able to make even better and more powerful defensive reactions like Counterspell will let us shut down enemies and prevent our allies from dying under any circumstances. So now we shut down enemy attacks and enemy spells. And Warden of Vitality. Warden of Vitality is great. This is going to let us use our bonus actions to pass out the buff on healing effects, give us a ton of additional healing. We only have one bonus action. This isn't the full Warden of Vitality build where you use Thief Rogue for the extra bonus action, although you could use the Helmet of Grit to play at half HP and have 2 Warden of Vitality charges. But even just the one bonus action every turn for this character is really nice, so Warden of Vitality gives you a ton of additional support, buffing, and healing for your party. If you don't want to use Warden of Vitality, if your fights aren't going that long, or if you just want a more offensively focused spell, Hunger of Hadar is always an excellent choice. Enemies are just automatically blinded when they're in the Hunger of Hadar, so it's just going to completely wipe out enemies entirely. Or Haste, if you want that and don't have access to it elsewhere in your party, is always, of course, another great buff. For our Bard spells here, for the combat version of the build, we're still going to pick up Plant Growth, just very useful to have access to. And at this point, for the non-combatant version of the build, we can just go back and grab other utility spells, anything that you think your party might be missing at this point. Knock for opening locks even more. Lesser Restoration, for example, can be very useful for removing poisons. Various tools here that you can grab, but we already have the core of our combat setup for that version of the character online, so you can kind of take whatever you want here for flavor. So, we've now gotten pretty much everything that we need from Bard. We've got the best defensive reaction setup in the game, with Cutting Words and Counterspell available, but we can improve it even further, and we can add more support by leveling up and going back into levels of Cleric. At level 2, Light Cleric, we get the AoE damage ability. Of course, we could have grabbed this earlier. It is very, very good in the early game, but this is still useful at this point if we're doing a Radiating Orb setup, which this character is very capable of using the Radiating Orb gear to reduce enemy attack rolls, which again helps protect your allies. So even getting this later on, it's still very useful. Since enemies still take half damage, we don't need to have high save DCs if they pass the save. We don't need to have high save DCs on this effect to apply the Radiating Orbs, so this can still be a very useful ability, even later in the game. Don't overlook it. And then at Cleric level 3, we get access to second level Cleric spells. So firstly, as a late domain Cleric, we get Flaming Sphere and Scorching Ray, and again, Flaming Sphere, at least, is still pretty useful at this point in the game. Enemies will focus their attacks on it, so while you'll usually want to spend your concentration on something else, the Flaming Sphere can still be a distraction from your more valuable allies. Had to pause the recording there for a moment to cut an enormous sneeze, so headphone users, say thank you, I got your backs. But at this level, we also get to prepare second level Cleric spells. In addition to having Healing Word, which of course, and Sanctuary, which of course we're going to keep, we now get other utility spells that we can add from second level. Aid is very, very useful for this character. Remember, we are at this point a 9th level spellcaster, so we can cast Aid with up to a 5th level spell slot. Since we have mostly lower level spells, this character is a great character to upcast Aid with, because we don't need this for level 5 spells. We can just use our 5th level spell slot on boosting our whole party's HP. Of course, you can do this from a camp caster if you're using camp casters, but Aid is still very, very useful, even if cast from an actual party member, so having that is great. Similarly, this character also gets to take advantage of Warding Bond. Again, this is usually something that you'll cast from a camp caster, a character that stays back in your camp, and you can sort of cheese the game by having your active party members just always take half damage if you do it that way. But Warding Bond on a character like this, with lots and lots of healing, is actually a pretty useful ability. Splitting the damage in half between your two characters can be very, very helpful, especially because we're mitigating so much of the incoming damage with Cutting Words and later with Improved Warding Flare and Warding Flare, and then we can heal it back up with our Warden of Vitality bonus actions while still doing other stuff in combat. So this character gets to use Warding Bond sort of as intended in a way that often you don't see in Baldur's Gate, but splitting the damage between multiple party members is a pretty big advantage, especially when your character has this much healing output. One thing that we aren't taking, by the way, is Cure Wounds. It's still pretty inefficient as a spell for healing, so if you want to heal, use Warden of Vitality rather than Cure Wounds. Cure Wounds rarely is going to be worth the spell slot, and if you need a burst of healing, that's what healing potions are for. At Cleric level 4, we get our second feat, and again, we can kind of play around with what we want here. I still recommend, just as the best default, just boosting your charisma. It's going to increase the save DCs on your offensive abilities if you're using those, and also just make you better at dialogue checks and everything, so you can never go wrong with an ASI. But again, this character has a lot more room to play around with different feats than other characters, so feel free to take stuff that you just have always wanted to try. A couple things that could be kind of fun to pick up here. I already mentioned taking Lucky, which can just make your character a little bit better at staying alive. You can take Sentinel. This character actually will be able to make attack rolls because we have 16 dexterity. We're going to be using a high value weapon with a high enchantment bonus. So locking down enemies with Sentinel is still something this character can do, even without boosting its dexterity significantly. If you plan to do a lot of Warding Bond stuff, you can take Tough. You can also take Warcaster just to keep concentration on spells better. There's a lot of different options here, so I recommend experimenting, but of course the strongest default is just to boost our charisma with an ability score improvement. For our cantrip selection at this level, we can pick up Blade Ward. This character will rarely need Blade Ward, but when you do, you'll be glad to have it. If you're isolated and surrounded by a bunch of enemies, having the incoming damage can still be very useful, so nice to just have this available for if you happen to really badly need it. At level 11, we're taking the 5th level of Cleric, and we get now 3rd level Cleric spells. This gives us yet another great healing option in the form of Mass Healing Word, so we can pick that up. And then also you can take Beacon of Hope on this character. It's not a very efficient spell, but it is very thematic, so it would be kind of fun to take. In general, I don't recommend this spell, but for this character's theming, it isn't terrible, and you are doing a lot of healing, so you will get maximized healing and get some value out of it. The most efficient combat spell is still almost certainly Spirit Guardians. This character can be set up as a Radiating Orb build, where you just run around as Spirit Guardians. Doesn't matter that you have low wisdom and enemies won't take that much damage, because they still take half of the Spirit Guardians damage, and that's enough to apply Radiating Orb and start stacking that up. So, for the pure pacifist version of the build, I'd recommend taking Beacon of Hope, because it's just kind of fun that this spell has a use for this character, even if it's relatively marginal. And for the more sort of damage and power optimized version of the build, you can just take Spirit Guardians and do Radiating Orb stuff, because that's just always very good when you're playing a Cleric in Baldur's Gate 3. And finally, at character level 12, we get our 6th level of Cleric, and get improved Warding Flare. At this point, we now have 2 reactions, because we've found the Duelist's Prerogative, because we're level 12, or at least are very close to it. So now you can use Counterspell, Cutting Words, and Improved Warding Flare to protect an ally. You can use any 2 of those in a given turn, and you can use 2 defensive reactions every turn. The amount of damage that this mitigates is ridiculous, and then combined with our very high healing from, for example, Beacon of Hope plus Warden of Vitality, means that our allies are just never going to be dying. So we're going to be passing out buffs to all of them, preventing incoming damage, countering enemy spells, and stopping enemies from doing anything meaningful to our party. So this character keeps our party alive incredibly, incredibly well. Of course, we can make it even better, as is always the case with effective itemization, so let's talk about gear. For items for this character, one of the strengths of playing this kind of character in Baldur's Gate 3 is that we get access to some of the absolute strongest item sets in the game. So firstly, of course, there's one item that I think is fairly mandatory for playing this build, and that's the Duelist's Prerogative. Obviously, your build works just fine up until the point where you get this, but this will increase the power level of the build dramatically by giving you an extra reaction. This whole build is based around multiple defensive reactions in the form of Cutting Words and Improved Warding Flare, so the Duelist's Prerogative makes you able to use 2 of them in a turn, giving you access to 2 of those or Counterspell in any given turn that you need it. This way, although it does mean sacrificing a little armor class, because we can't use a shield alongside it, the character becomes dramatically better at protecting your allies, and your armor class mostly doesn't matter, because a lot of the game you're going to be playing from inside Sanctuary, so you don't have to worry about having relatively low armor class. We also are one of the best users in the game of the buff on heal item sets. The Hellrider's Pride and the Whispering Promise apply Bless and Blade Ward to our allies whenever we heal them, and this can be any form of healing, including throwing a potion at them. So these items increase your allies' combat effectiveness enormously. We can apply these as bonus actions using Warden of Vitality or using Healing Word, and those are very good as well. In addition to these, you can use the Boots of Aid and Comfort for 3 temp HP on top of those 2 very, very powerful buffs, and the Ring of Salving for 2 extra hit points every time we heal to increase our healing numbers a lot. This character is doing a lot of small instances of healing, so the Ring of Salving will get a lot of value. It seems like a small number, and it is, but it adds up to a lot of hit points over time. In the early game especially, alongside these, one item that's pretty fun to use is Wapira's Crown. We're going to be healing our allies a lot, so this helps keep our hit points topped up alongside that, so you can really spec this character as a pure healer, as well as a defensive character with all of our reactions, and you'll be very, very effective. For the more offensive-focused version of the build, items that increase your save DCs, like the Fistbreaker Helm, will prevent enemies from doing stuff, and that, of course, is always very good. Another option over the Boots of Aid and Comfort, if you want more mobility, is the Disintegrating Nightwalkers, because that will give you access to Misty Step once per short rest, and let your character get out of bad situations if you find yourself in them. Another way that this character can contribute, like any cleric, is by running around with Spirit Guardians and the Radiating Orb item set. The Luminous Armor adds Radiating Orbs whenever you hit an enemy with radiant damage, and then you can combine that with the Coruscation Ring and the Callous Glow Ring to deal additional radiant damage and stack hit chance penalties on enemies. Combined with Cutting Words, enemies will be taking like -10 from Radiating Orb, -4.5 from Cutting Words, potentially disadvantage from Warding Flare. They will never, ever hit your party if you are using the Radiating Orb stuff. You can also have the Radiating Orb set on a different character while this character is supporting them, and then that character will never lose concentration on their Spirit Guardian. So if you have another Cleric running around, the double Cleric party is one of the easiest ways to win Honor Mode, in my opinion. Then that character will have all the protection they need to keep concentration on Spirit Guardians, and nobody will ever be getting hit because of the incredible penalties that they'll be taking to hit chance. You can also combine that with the Gloves of Belligerent Skies and Boots of Stormy Clamor to knock everyone prone with additional reverberation, because you'll be inflicting conditions, so you'll be stacking tons and tons of reverberation on enemies as you are running around doing radiating damage, and then they'll also be knocked prone, have huge hit chance penalties, and just be unable to do anything past the first turn of combat. Very powerful strategy as well. A couple other fun items for this character. The Devotee's Mace, when if you have another Cleric to hit level 10 or do a respec, the Healing Incense Aura is very, very good for this character. Just constantly healing at the start of your turn is really nice, and again, you can run around in Sanctuary and do this. It applies all the buffs and everything, so very powerful. I still prefer the Duelist Prerogative, but this is another great option for a weapon. In the early game, the Blood of Lathander, just to run around and debuff undead, is a pretty good weapon as well. And of course, in the earlier game, you'll want a shield. I recommend the Adamantine Shield to be immune to critical hits, just to increase the overall safety of your party even further. This character really is mostly about abusing the buff on heal item set, though. It's going to make sure that your party is always taking half damage from everything, always blessed, so they're always hitting all of their spells, they're healing all of their attacks, they're healing constantly, they're passing their saving throws. Any attack that does get through, you're going to Cutting Words or Warding Flare to prevent it, and so your allies can just operate in perfect safety. It's really good, especially if you have somewhat unreliable co-op teammates, but also if you are just worried about having a more offensively focused party and want a character that will keep them alive, this is great. And it will let you experiment with even more all-in builds if you want to play like a low health, all-in melee damage build with no defensive abilities. This character can enable that strategy to work really, really well without being as risky as that kind of character normally is. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the ultimate support character in Baldur's Gate 3, and I hope it helps you planning out your honor mode parties, or just having a blast with your friends and keeping them alive no matter what they do. Also, let me know in the comments if any of you do a pacifist run. I did part of one while I was testing this character, and it was an absolute blast playing through without harming an enemy at all. If any of you complete the game without lifting a finger to harm an enemy, definitely let me know. I'd love to hear about that. And, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, then feel free to hit the like button and leave a comment. Those things help me out a ton with the algorithm. YouTube just loves it when you hit buttons, so if you do that, it's the best way to support content creators that you are enjoying their stuff. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I will catch you next time.